Today's guest has been obsessed with video since the VHS camcorder days. And nearly 20 years later, he's still thinking deeply about how storytelling actually drives decisions. He's the founder of Pennant Video. Tim, welcome to Fully Managed.
Hey, thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
So, you've been hooked, like we just said, on storytelling since the VHS camcorder days. So, when you look back at that kid hitting record in your dad's living room, what part of that creative energy have you intentionally protected as you've grown?
Oh, wow. I love that question right out the gate. Yeah, I think it's probably that sort of like sense of exploration in a way, right? Like that creative exploration. It's like, yeah, you have this sort of like vision or set of intentions, right? But it's like until you start like pushing the red record button or like moving keyframes around, it's like it starts to really the expression really starts to come to life, right? And then of course like collaboration with others, like creatives and clients and peers and what have you, right? It really just like that exploration along the way is just like the thing that I think like gets me excited each and every time.
I love that, and I think part of life is keeping that inner child alive. And that connects you so much to your creative side, I feel.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And it's, fortunately, like I get to talk with like early creatives or folks who are just sort of like entering the workforce, right? And it's like all of those moments and those conversations just kind of remind you of like, oh yeah, the passion is like so important and like really just sort of the momentum builder, right? In a career like this. So it's really cool.
Absolutely. And I always love asking this following question because I think growth isn't just about learning more. It's also about unlearning. There's this constant tension between gaining new skills and letting go of old habits that no longer serve us. So I'm curious how that's played out in your journey. So as you've built Pennant into a revenue driving studio, what did you have to unlearn from your early creative instincts in order to lead at this level?
Yeah. Oh, wow. Another great question. I mean, I think that there is this like old saying that's like the client is always right, unless of course they're not, So I think some of it's just in the confidence, through a depth of experience to be that sort of like guide or sound counsel or like, you sort of grow the confidence to be that devil's advocate in the moment, right? So I think some of it's just like realizing and recognizing that like, yeah, the person you're like creating this like this project for, this video for, this brand that you're doing this on behalf of, like it isn't necessarily like always right all the time. And that's like totally fine, And so I think for me, the mantra there is recognizing that like really the people we're serving, the audience, that like the real audience for this is the people, the prospects, the audiences on the other side of the devices, right? So like, as long as we can help like shepherd the message and like the artistry and the creative on the responsibility really like on behalf of the audiences, then like everyone in the sort of like whole spectrum it ends up winning, I think.
Yeah. And going from intrapreneur inside a larger agency to founder of Pennant Video, what surprised you most about your own identity in that shift? Did you become more decisive, more protective, more patient?
Yeah. I think the decision-making factor, right? Like I've found that I've always been like, I know where to seek the right sort of inputs of information to help like, at least like lay all the cards out. So I understand like sort of the outcomes or perceived outcomes of decision-making, right? But I've found that like indecision is probably the most like crippling part of like any entrepreneurship journey, right? Is like the indecision is the thing that's really going to hold you back. And I've recognized that like the power of like sort of effective decision making, right? Like ultimately it is a constant state of decision making. Yeah. Like you're just going to make decisions forever. So like whatever that sort of hard or otherwise decision is that you make, there's going to be another one on the backside of that. And you can always like make a decision to, revert back or to make changes or what have you, So there's a lot of power in that. So I think just as long as you can like dissuade the indecision factor, you're going to be all right.
And I love your metaphor of entrepreneurship being a second climb, not a leap. So I'm curious if you did something differently the second time up the mountain, specifically around systems or boundaries or self-trust.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's like So just for context for the audience here, like I was inside an agency building like the creative sort of like arm or extension of that business for nearly 12 years. And so many like learnings happened like just in it, while things were in motion, you know what I mean? But I think the bigger sort of like takeaway, so that it wasn't really like a leap, was like, to be that entrepreneur, you got to have like the sort of well-roundedness perspective, right? It's like, sure, like the creative is sort of like a sense of table stakes, right? But then it's like, all right, well, what's the sort of like business development like acumen and like relationships and networking, and then of course the responsibilities of like operations and management and all of that, So I think at the end of the day, it was like I the leap of faith was really just like in myself, that like, yeah, I've actually like you've the sort of like peak analogy here, like you've crested some semblance of a peak here, and now you're just going back down and doing the route again, but now with like faster and more intention and more focus and more sort of like discipline to like the different milestones that you experience, you know what I mean? So I feel very like fortunate in that way that I did get to sort of experience that, right? I think a lot of it too, now that I'm like living it, is like really, you always want to be like full steam ahead, like the next win, the next opportunity, the next like portfolio piece, the next, but just like pause and like do some like reflection and like reflection in a way, right? Of like anticipating sort of the next things. Like that's like really helps like ground me week over week, is just like that intentional sort of pause and make sure that like, yeah, I'm climbing this path again, but let's make sure I'm not like going way out of bounds or something, right? Let's make sure it's like staying the course type of thing.
And I feel like it must have taken a lot of courage to climb that step, take that leap.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, trust me, I had a lot of people in my corner, right? Like my wife was my biggest sort of champion in this moment. Like, listen, you are doing this, you're sort of doing it on behalf of somebody else's like passive income. You know what I mean? So it was like sort of that factor to it. But then it was also just like talking with a couple like mentors or like peers that I respect like so much, and then my business partners too, and just sort of that like having those right like surroundings, to have that confidence, I think was like super beneficial.
You've written about how attention is limited. 3 seconds of scroll, maybe 60 seconds if you've earned trust. And honestly, that feels more true than ever right now. We're scrolling, we're skimming, we're half watching. So when marketing teams feel that pressure to just produce more, how do you shift the conversation toward clarity and strategic depth instead of just content volume?
Yeah, volume is volume and time are probably the two like biggest sort of factors in any conversation, right? And it's like at the end of the day, it's not like taking pause, but just making sure you're taking, I guess, like stock in that you're doing this for the right intentions on behalf of the audience, right? Like, what do they need to help them, like to really like empower them to make a better decision based on their journey with you, right? So it's like we primarily at Pennant like work at a lot of B2B with a lot of B2B brands, right? And so their like sales cycles can be many months, sometimes years, so it's like, how do you ensure that you're showing up in the right ways as a brand, that you're like, sure, providing value, like helping this empowering of decision making, right? Like like creating a journey with the right like touch points based on trust, right? So it's like you want to make sure that whatever it is, that the output that you're producing is like ensuring that the trust factor is being like more codified or solidified, right? That you're answering the sort of most common FAQs along the way, right? And like obviously all of these tools, these videos can like empower sales enablement and sort of like smaller group closed door conversations too, which is really powerful, right? So I think the volume thing is like, it's like, oh, it's so easy to produce and create like more now than ever. Yeah. And it's like, while that's absolutely true, it's like, just make sure that you're doing it for the right intentions and reasons that benefit the audience that's trying to make a decision based on their own sort of like expectation or journey with you as a brand, right?
And in your experience, when a video fails to earn that deeper attention, what's usually missing? Like, where do brands most often get trust wrong?
Yeah, I mean, story. straight up, right? Like, is there a story here? Are we like showing, is there a pain point resolution situation here that's like putting, sort of the empathy forward of like your buyer, your prospective buyer, like putting them in your shoes that in that way, right? And like a lot of it is just, ensuring that you're not trying, and for that reason, you're trying not to say everything for everybody all at once, right? Like we're not, you can't describe like all of what you do to everybody and all of your ICPs and all of the decision making sort of like key stakeholders that are behind the people using your product in this case or whatever, right? And it's like just be really thoughtful to tell like one like opportunity, one story, one resolution, like time over time. And like that's really your drumbeat based on story, which of course is like so indicative or provocative to like branding and marketing holistically, right? That I think like that's the best right thing. So if you find yourself being like, wow, I'm really just telling like this is all about me and us and our brand and this and that. It's like, it's kind of like, well, who's going to care, So just making sure it's like working on behalf of the audience and their journey and decision making with you is really the main thing.
And what's the one feeling great B2B video should leave a potential client with, in your opinion?
Feeling? Yeah. So that's a good question. I'm going to have like 3 different answers here, but meaning, well, all around the same thing, the same premise. Like it depends on where they are in their journey with you, right? So if they've seen you or like seen like a banner ad or like been to a trade show and saw the booth or like whatever it is, right? Like somehow they've arrived at your probably website, right? Or some semblance of like an online destination, right? Right then you want to speak to like the hearts of that audience, right? Like they want to see that sort of reflection of themselves in your either like set of like values or your mission or sense of belief or purpose. You know what I mean? So that's one answer, is like talking to the hearts of this audience, right? The second is kind of like the other side of the same coin, is like speak to the minds of this audience, right? Like help them better understand like how, and whatever it is you make or produce, like benefits them as a buyer, like what it is that you actually do and how it works. You know what I mean? So those are kind of the main ones. Then that third one, and I'm sort of like working through the messaging of this, so bear with me, but it's kind of talking to that, like that gut feeling, right? Like what is that gut feeling that an audience would have with you? And that's really those like third party validation, case studies, customer stories, endorsement video type of aspects, right? That it's just like, okay, I not only do I like see myself in the sense of like belief and purpose and sort of mission, I understand how this fits into my ecosystem and really how it helps solve what I'm trying to do here. And then I hear it from like businesses or like people, like sort of like professional status, and how this has solved that problem. So it's like those 3 prongs, you've just built so much trust and just like whatever, just like perceived value, right? Yeah. On behalf of this audience. So a long-winded answer. Thanks for dealing with me on that. But yeah, speak to the heart, speak to the mind, and like, sort of challenge that gut feeling,
I love challenging that gut feeling. It's very powerful, I feel. So you've mentioned being part of the judging council for the Telly Awards and how that process forces you to slow down and really evaluate work beyond surface level polish. So from that perspective, what tends to separate work that's memorable and effective from work that's simply well produced, in your opinion?
Yeah. So for some context, like the Telly Awards, I love that program because it's like it showcases so much like impressive work from everything from like high-end commercials to like student films and documentaries and branded content and et cetera, right? So what's interesting though is that as a judge, like all we get is like appropriately, all we get is like a portal, right? And it's like this, here's your login. We want you to judge like 60 things, right? And so for me, it's like I get a URL, I pull up that URL, and that is my experience, right? So I don't have any preconceived like bias or notion of like where and how these videos are like being used or where they are embedded in the wild or like where they were used out of home, like no context, right? And so it really is like about the craft, you know what I mean? And so it's like for me as a absolutely cold audience, like I need to first of all be kind of like hooked and interested in it, right? Like obviously you can like very quickly understand the degrees of production value like sort of infused into the situation, and therefore like that sort of semblance of like care is front and center. Then yeah, it's like the merits of story and the merits of just like what is that feeling, what is that like emotion that they're trying to that they want me to have, so it's a really powerful program. And again, just selfishly for me, it's like just such a humble reminder that like, yeah, we have so much bias in like, building buyers journeys and like understanding all these ecosystems and all this and that. But it's like, if it can resonate with literally anybody, whatever it is you're producing, or at least like gain the respect of anybody, then like that's where like the work, the craft has like done its job.
It seems like a very cool space to be part of. It can, I feel like you can learn so much, like you just said.
Yep.
In a world that rewards more clients, more hires, more visibility, what have you learned about the power of restraint? Like, what has saying no created space for?
Yeah. Constraint's been sort of a big topic like since launching Pennant, right? Because it's like we can't work for everybody everywhere all the time. Like the sort of gamut of maturity of businesses, the gamut of industries, the gamut of the people inside those four walls, and like what their day-to-day roles and opportunities are, right? So like sort of on the selfish front for Pennant, it was just like, how do we ensure the work that we're producing has the greatest impact it possibly can for this business, right? And so that's why we have such a middle of the funnel focus, because it's like where that trust and consideration phase is like so important and often overlooked, because it's not the like flashy commercial advertising per se, and it's not the like bottom of the funnel sort of general drumbeat, right? So it's like it takes such like a certain focus and finesse in that way, but that's like, that was our constraint as a business ultimately, right? Is like, this is why we exist. It aligns with our purpose, but that constraint is also super powerful when we have opportunities coming in, or like recognizing sort of forest for the trees and other areas, you know what I mean? So there's that. But then when it comes down to like the projects in and of themselves, it's like the biggest constraints are always time and budget, right?
Yeah.
And resourcing therein, right? So those are kind of like the table stakes of it all. But when you get into like the actual producing of something, it's like you want to make sure that that story has a true constraint, right? Like it should really have like one main takeaway, and like how do you do that? What's the other constraints of like, well, like how much of something do we want to showcase here? Like you want to use video, especially in video marketing, as like the proverbial sort of carrot on the string, right? Like, I want more. I want more. It should be a tool that is like enlightening or surprising or like just impactful enough to like warrant a next step, So it's like, you want that constraint to be like, like give them just enough information to help them like want to click into the next thing, or to like, schedule the demo or whatever the situation is in that case.
Interesting. And you've spoken about breaking the feast or famine rhythm so many studios accept as normal. So what's one operating rhythm or habit that quietly changed everything for you?
Oh, another good question. To call back to like the like pausing, reflection, preflection, like that's a big thing, because it's like, it helps ensure I'm blocking the time thoughtfully week over week, right? And like where and how we need to like amplify or tighten the screws on the sort of like business development operating system sort of all overall, right? Like ensuring we're using the right cadence in our visibility strategy, as we call it, and just sort of like how myself and the team like shows up on LinkedIn in particular. Then also, what are the sort of like flagpole, tentpole like moments we want to have, and like activations with videos or ebooks, or how we're showing up on online communities and things like that. So just having the moment to pause and pre-plan is really the ultimate best thing. You know what I mean? And it's also that moment to just like look back and be like, what's working, what's not, and if it's not, why do we think that is? How can we tinker? Just make the adjustments that need to be made.
Very reflective. I like that. I think the world is just too fast paced And I love that you prioritize slowing down and taking a breather and just analyzing and reflecting on everything.
Yeah, I mean, trust me, it's hard to do. It can easily be the first thing that you're like, well, I gotta fit in this new opportunity into this day. Like, so it's not like a perfect science or system, but I just try to stay accountable to it because like if I don't, then you just feel like you're living in this sort of state of
Yeah.
chaos all the time, and then that's just really challenging.
You've written that sustainability is a competitive advantage. In your experience, what does burnout actually look like inside a video agency today?
Yeah, it's saying yes to everything, right? Because it's called a creative process, right? So like the process has to be like explicitly inherent into what you do. So if you say yes to all the opportunities in every direction, like you have not developed a process. You are relearning or like reinventing or sort of transcoding whatever it is like the inputs you need to have to like assure some semblance of success, right? So for us, again, that constraint of where we live and exist assures that we can have as true as possible process in the creative process. So I think that's a really big advantage for anyone is if you can identify like what is our best sense of process. And there's a few ways you can do it, right? It's like literally map out a project life cycle, like the journey of this project, and like what are all the touch points along the way, both for like internal teammates, for external clients in this case, right? What are all the tools that you're touching along the way? How long do these things like actually take? And like pressure test it time and time again, like by taking the time to reflect and like, you know, there's tools like time tracking and there's like project management and all of that stuff, like to each their own, but it is really helpful when you're just trying to like fine tune that sort of rhythm. And that rhythm is that sort of sustainability that you're trying to like stand up for yourself. Right.
Interesting. And you've described entrepreneurship as contribution, not competition, which I find so refreshing. So, what does that mindset change in how you show up with clients, with collaborators, or even other studios?
Yeah, definitely the other studios front. Like even just this morning, I reached across the aisle to an old colleague of mine who I helped get placed inside of a studio that's like, I mean, maybe on paper we're competitors, right? But we definitely have never thought of it that way. So it's like, but talking with him today to like, I'm working through what our growth strategy is for this year, and it's like they're a much bigger studio than we are. So it's like you should absolutely be talking to those studios that are like 2, 3, 4 years ahead of you, so they can sort of send the proverbial elevator back down to like, yeah, these are the sort of the pitfalls or things you might want to keep an eye out for or things that we learned. So I think that's where it's like, man, I wouldn't be here where I am today if I haven't like talked to others that have experienced the things that I'm like anticipating going through. So I think, yeah, like there is I guess there's the competition factor of it all, but it's like, especially in this, video marketing, brand marketing world, there's so much opportunity, right? And it's like, the more we can have our own sense of like value and purpose and vision, you know what I mean? Then everyone knows that's your position, and you can become like a referral when they have something at their doorstep that doesn't work for their business model. You know what I mean? So I definitely find it to be more collaborative than competitive.
That's a very cool way of thinking about the business. So you are part of the agency side, which describes itself as a space where agency leaders can have more candid conversations. And the agency side talks about checking egos at the door, which I love. And I'm very curious what kinds of conversations become possible when the room prioritizes honesty over optics.
Yeah, I love the agency side. So for context, like it's a north of Boston networking group for agency owners and leaders. So it's a lot of like small, medium size agencies for the most part, really running the full gamut of like really digital marketing and even like events and out of home activations and things like that too. So yeah, there's just so much like to glean from others that have done this for, a decade, 2 decades or more, right? Like they've lived many, many seasons of their own business, right? And it's like you sort of ultimately recognize that like business can and should just continue to evolve like forever, right? Or at least like as long as you have the, as long as you want to keep having your business, right? So I think just like recognizing those like, and a space like that creates the opportunity to recognize sort of patterns and like allow you to sort of check your own anxieties at the door, right? Because like you can hear from others and the sort of lived experience factor of it all. But it's also the same thing. It's like, there's a lot of digital marketing groups and public relations and SEO, and then we're video marketing, right? So it's like we can understand how each of our sort of like respective puzzle pieces can fit together so that we can collaborate. And I've had some like super successful opportunities with clients via these other agencies, right? Where we've gotten to show up and collaborate together. So I think it's like all of that is tremendously powerful, not just for like me as this, the business owner, but the other business owners in the room, as well as a holistic region, you know what I mean? That's trying to compete against the sort of like greater Boston community,
You're part of some really cool groups, which leads me to my next question. You're leading a new circle inside Forum focused on working brand direct and selling outcomes. So how has your definition of creative leadership evolved over time?
Yeah, you've really done your research. I'm impressed. Yeah, so Forum is another sort of like agency owner group. It's all virtual, right? So I'm able to connect with and converse with like people from all over the globe. Like I in my DMs are folks from Brazil and Amsterdam
Cool.
and like all throughout the states, right? And so what I find really powerful about that community is like there's so many levers that can and should be like pulled or tinkered with or whatever when running a creative studio, and so to have this like infusion of like hundreds of minds that like are all sort of experiencing the same thing, either like have experienced it or they're about to experience it, right? So like the collaboration continues within there, and so for me in this moment, I'm leading this sort of, as you said, like brand direct approach where it's like my business, we primarily work direct to brand as well as with agencies, hence the agency side, right? But there's a lot of folks that like they've either just started their entrepreneurship journey or they've just broken out of being in house somewhere and they're trying to be like, great, how do I do this on behalf of my own business? So a lot of it's in the sort of those day-to-day tactics and the week over week sort of rhythms of like building a system that supports that sustainability and that like fluidity of your own brand positioning and messaging and who you serve and your ICPs and sort of all the things that are like super important from a marketing and sales perspective, So yeah, so I'm super grateful that I am like leading one of these like circles in this moment, right? And it's like less than 10 other, sort of peer creative studio leaders, so there's a lot of like intimate sort of like vulnerability certainly shows up at the door, and like we help sort of like support each other and like what we learned or experienced in this and that. So it's a really like collaborative space. And I'm so shout out to Joel Pilger, who's like the guy who runs the whole thing. It's been a real sort of like blessing for the lot of us the last like many years.
I can imagine. I can only imagine. That must be such a cool group to be part of. And as we wrap up, I always like to ask this. Along the way, was there someone who had a meaningful impact on your journey? It could be a mentor, a peer, even someone whose work influenced you.
Yeah. Well, at face value, it's definitely my wife, right? But so I have to give her all the kudos and flowers, endless, right? But the other person that was like really critical in a moment was actually an old college friend, Josh Pritchard. So we went to school together. We like sort of kept, stayed in touch, through the interwebs and all that. But he's been running his design studio for like over a decade now, and so he became like such an important person, like literally at the turn or the moment where I was going to go from that entrepreneur to entrepreneur. Like he was literally like kind of like the proverbial hinge to that turn, it just sort of like having that objective perspective and like, having and currently running his own studio, like understanding, everything from like the legalese and the, standing up a founders agreement and like making sure like you just remain so cool and objective. And it just was like, yeah, I will literally talk to you at any time you have a question along this moment, And so for the better part of like 6 months there, he was like, when I was planning to make the leap, right, he was just like such a huge proponent and like advocate for what we were doing. And I really just appreciate all that support.
Oh, that's nice. Well, shout out to Josh Pritchard.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Tim. It's been so cool to learn a little bit about how you work. Thank you so much for bringing your insights. It's been really interesting and fun and cool to see how you think, how you work. And I'm very excited to see what life has in store for you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This was super fun to talk. Thank you.
You've been listening to Fully Managed, brought to you by Penji. Check out the show notes to learn more about today's guest, and to learn more about Penji, the human-first creative subscription service, head over to penji.co. And by the way, if you're still listening, it would mean the absolute world to us if you were to share this podcast with a friend, and of course, subscribe.